right, hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. I'm here with Pamela Gupta, and we are talking on the Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Fix, where we chat once a month about issues that are in the news about technology, privacy, and cybersecurity. So, Pamela, you said that you saw a video that I posted about automobile telematics and about a law that was recently passed in Massachusetts about the use of telematics. So, I'll just briefly describe what the law is about, and then we can kind of jump into the discussion. So, Massachusetts, well, first of all, the automobile associations and the automobile manufacturers and associations were kind of fighting this particular law in Massachusetts, but then people who did like auto shops or let's say AutoZone sells like aftermarket parts or whatever, they were fighting for this bill. So on November 3rd, Massachusetts passed this bill that said that in 2022, manufacturers of new cars need to give consumers an app where they can see what data is being collected by their car, and then they can choose if they want their car serviced not by a dealer, but by like an aftermarket shop. So the issue that they were trying to solve was, well, actually twofold. So one was there was a situation where manufacturers or dealers had access to the data that's collected by the car, and because cars are computers, some of that data you would need, information you would need to be able to service the car. So the issue was that those organizations were not sharing that information with aftermarket auto shops. So then those auto shops couldn't repair certain cars because they didn't have access to some of the data that they would need for diagnostics and things like that. So this law passed in Massachusetts. The really interesting thing is, as a part of happenstance, they made it so that they want the user of the car to have an app to be able to see the data that's in the car, and then also be able to grant access to that data to whatever car shop that they want to use. So as part of this, they want to be able to have consumers have more visibility into the type of data that's being collected in cars. And this is something that concerns me. And I'll tell you, I don't know, I don't think you ever heard this story that I told you. So this is what got me interested in telematics, really. So I had a car, this is many years ago. I think it was a Jeep at that time, and I needed to get an oil change, and I typically go to the dealer that's close by my house. But for whatever reason, I was in a different town. I needed an oil change, so I went to a different dealer. So not associated with the same dealer. It was just a different dealer that serviced these cars. And I drove up to the dealership and I asked them. I said, I want to get an oil change. I'm like, do you need, I need to give you my information. And they said, no, you don't. And I was like, what are you talking about? So this lady, she took this thing, she stuck it under the dashboard of my car, my truck, and then she put it into like an iPad, and it popped up not only all the stuff about the car, but it had my name, it had my address, had my phone number on it. And I could have fainted. I could have fallen out because I'm like, why is this stuff in my car? I had no clue that this was in here. It's like, it's in here. I'm like, is this secure? Can someone hack this information? Can someone track me? It just totally freaked me out. So I think knowing now what I know, that this information can be stored there, I'm really concerned because I would not have cared about the other stuff, like the odometer reading and stuff like that. That, obviously, because the cars are so complicated, obviously that stuff is in there. But if you're putting other stuff in there that I don't know about, that's what I have a problem with. So what are your thoughts?
So I think there are a couple of things here. One is, as cars do have a lot of computers in there, and I would say that it's a manifestation of your driving data centers now, because we have, as cars are getting more and more modern, the number of computers are increasing, and these ECUs, as they're called, they are not like a data center where they have a firewall and then they're protected, and they are only talking to servers that they should be talking. These ECUs can pretty much, talk to any, pass on messages from one to any of the others that they want to, and if they're, compromised, for example. So cars definitely are a complex cybersecurity domain now, and they only will get more and more complex as we throw more electronics in there, as we throw more protocols in there, such as, for example, if you know the tire sensor, right? The sensor from the tire, when it's sending information to your dashboard, to the OBD, the onboard diagnostics panel, that is going over wireless, for example.
Right.
Okay. So there are multiple protocols already that are being kind of coming together, which the older cars didn't have, for example. So as we're going forward, the complexity, cybersecurity complexity of cars is increasing. In fact, I just published an article on a cybersecurity physical framework for cyber physical systems in vehicles. Okay, this is a massive area of complexity. And definitely, you can look it up on LinkedIn. I posted a link to the Telematics magazine that published the article. But I won't go into that complexity right now. Okay, but so I just want to kind of acknowledge what you said, that it is a complex area. The other thing that makes cars really complex to secure is the amount of software that is in the cars right now. It's over 1 million lines of code. Application security has been an area of complexity. Okay, and it's not easy to do. It's expensive, and it's very easy to do it wrong. It's very hard to do it right.
Yeah.
So there's it's an area that we needs more than obviously a passing review and concern, and that is being taken seriously.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the data that is stored within the car, and that raises a few questions and concerns. Okay, who has access to that data, and B, even when you sell a car, for example, how do you make sure that data is removed? Okay,
right.
Even as you go, so do you really want to see the data from the previous owners, which may be very sensitive in nature, for example, etc.
Yes, right.
So it brings us to this conversation on what is the data that we are, what is data is saved in these devices, if you want to call it that. It is a device. And how do you ensure that it has the restricted access, right? Is not. Firstly, do we even need that data to be stored? How much is required? And those are the conversations we really need to have from a privacy perspective, right? So that is extremely important for kind of getting across to the right folks in the industry who are making those decisions, because a lot of it is going to be driven by business requirements, right? Yes. And the question always is, so as a CISO in organizations, for example, my question is always to the business: how much of this is the data that we are collecting? Is it for a business purpose? Do we need it, right? Yeah. So that conversation, that question never changes, whether it's a car or whether it's a data center or whether it is a e-commerce application, for example, right? That question should be the foremost when it comes to security and privacy, as in, do we need this data? How much sensitive data is there? Can we obfuscate it and still get value out of it for the business purposes, right? Again, business purpose is king, right? We do, or queen, right? We do need to collect. We have to support the business, but doesn't mean that we have to make the business insecure. So that's one thing.
And then because I read a study, the flip side of that is like the consumer side. So obviously people want to make cars attractive enough for people to buy it. They want to have like the newest things automakers have been very good at being on the cutting edge of getting innovations into cars that people like. Like one that I use all the time is like I connect my phone to Bluetooth in the car. That's one thing that I really like. The one thing I don't like is, that it may download my contact list of the car. And I'm thinking, so who has access to that? Like, what happens to that? Can I delete that? Is it in there? Is that being sold to someone? All those are all sort of the concerns that I have. So part of it is automakers want to make all these inventions and these things to make the car more attractive for a person to be able to buy it. But I think it also has to be balanced with, I would like to know, is that data secure? And do I really need it? Like, do I
Right.
really do I love Bluetooth so much that I'm willing to turn a blind eye to the fact that it's downloading my contacts to the car?
Right. Right. And then going back to that, the Massachusetts law, right, about data ownership, if the consumer has ownership of the data, so there, it comes down to two things, right? Do you know what data it is? And do we need it? And if we don't want it to be stored, can we delete it? That's one thing. When it comes to sensitive data, I agree with that. But this is what I was alluding to earlier, that when you pass a regulation or when you pass a law, it has to be thought through so that it can be securely implemented.
Right.
So a very prime requirement, a basic requirement of security is access on a need to know basis.
Right.
Especially the more critical the data is, the more that requirement becomes important.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are going to give this data to be owned by consumers, then are the consumers ready for the responsibility, right? So if
Right.
it's okay, if it is my credit card number that I want to, whether I want to share it or I don't want to share it,
Mm-hmm.
etc., that is fine. Or the restaurant that I want to select from the app in the, in the car, okay. But when it comes to mission critical, or safety data, right?
Right.
When what is in the critical aspect of the running of the car, for example, or vehicle, then that is data that we have to be really careful about. Is that data a part and parcel of this regulation? And
Yeah.
if so, then it is not secure for
Yeah.
users to have access and being able to determine who has access to it.
Yeah.
Because the fact of the matter is, AutoZone, yes, you mentioned, I can go on Amazon and buy 400 products that I can plug into my car right now to check for different things, well, including for that, the safety um,
Yeah.
things. So is that secure? We have to kind of balance that out. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying if we pass laws that have implications for users owning that part of those safety critical systems, I don't think we can do that yet.
Yeah, I think implementation, I mean, you could say that for almost any privacy law. So, especially dealing with technology. So, if you're not a
Right.
technologist, you don't understand how, you can't pass a law where it's impossible to implement. So, that will make the law fail. So, it's very important to be able to talk with people who know about technology that can help guide you with the language and how you speak about it, and also have some common sense reality around the time frames and the implementation of it. So I think one of the concerns that I had about data, so for me, I'm just naturally curious. So I would love to see what was in the car. Obviously, things about the workings of the car, that wouldn't mean anything to me because I'm not like a mechanic, or I'm not like a, mechanical engineer. But, one of the concerns that I have is that this data is being collected in such a way that it's already being sold to third parties. It's already being shared with law enforcement. It's already being shared with insurance companies. So the data about me as an individual exists in the car in a way that some of the other people can look at it. So why can't I look at it as an individual, or why can't I know about that as an individual?
And why can't you have control as to what you don't want there either?
Right.
Doesn't
Yeah.
need to be collected.
Right. Like maybe I don't want my last 25 rides recorded in my car. And that's right now my car does that. just on its own, or it grades how I ride. Every ride it gives me like a score for how well I drove and stuff like that. Like maybe I don't want to
Right.
collect that or something. And this stuff is being transmitted wirelessly, so it's not like deleting it out of your car doesn't mean it's erased. Like it exists in more than your car. It exists somewhere else in someone else's database. So to me, all that, just
Right.
because it's not transparent enough, I think that's a big problem. But I know automakers also are concerned because you're right. I think there's going to be a big argument around the world when they're passing laws about this, about what do users have a right to see? So do they have a right to see, how the sausage is made, and with the sensors and stuff, like, that the answer may be no to that, but then there's obviously other things that are in there that isn't transparent to users, and then things that you may not be able to delete or erase or access.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing, that in addition to the kind of data we were talking about, right, we're talking about another major industry that gets impacted by data that is being collected, and that is in the insurance industry. Okay.
Right.
And the kind of data that we are talking about, right, we need to be really careful, because if there is all this data is being directly sent to the insurance, or can be gathered by the insurance companies, we have to look at it, because there are economic and monetary repercussions, right?
Right.
So if they have access to your driving history and how fast you drive, et cetera, and how fast you're going around the curve, exactly, when, how much time you're spending even on your phone, for example, when you're driving, how much time are you looking at the screen when you're driving? I mean, all this data can be gathered. So this we have to tread cautiously when it comes to this. It's not just the consumer having access to their data. That is one small part of it, in my view. It's a question of how are we collecting, what are we collecting, and who are we collecting it for, right?
Right.
That is really important.
Yeah, and then this also goes back to what we are talking about with IoT, which I think is going to be a big issue in all the laws, which is the data being used for the purpose that we think it's being used for? So we have, to me, in the auto industry, we have a double issue. So the first is it's not transparent what is being collected. And then the other issue is it's not transparent as to what happens to the data once it's collected and who it's sent to. And that
Yeah.
needs to change.
Yeah, that's very much the case. And it doesn't even just stop here, right? But we
No.
can talk about in our next discussion about how these different areas will interrelate, whether it's IoT, whether it's data, massive amount of data, and AI, right?
Oh yeah,
Because
definitely.
you can't have this conversation without AI, because there's just too much data to be consumed and analyzed. So we need,
Yeah.
that's a very much a topic of
Yeah.
thinking through.
Well, why don't we'll talk one of our next sessions, we should talk about AI. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and blockchain. We can talk
Oh,
about blockchain
blockchain.
security as well.
Oh, that'd be amazing. So I think we have our marching orders for our next two
Yes.
sessions, I think. So,
Yes.
well, thank you so much, Pamela. I love that we have these conversations. I wish other people were having more of these conversations, because this, to me, I mean, it impacts businesses, but it also impacts us as individuals. So it's important to be able to have these types of things where we're sharing information and that we're educating as we go.
Yes, I think user awareness and training is king and queen, as I said earlier. It's without that, we really cannot move the needle on what we need most in this society, right? Security and privacy tightly integrated.
I agree. That's excellent. So on that note, we will wave bye bye
All
and
right.
watch us next time.